Um, so, I was going through I scanned through the list of itineraries, and then I realized that a lot of what I'm going to talk about today, I think is going to cascade across with the other speeches. And so I'm kind of a little confident now that what I'm going to talk about today is quite coherent to the general theme of the discussion over the entire day, right? So I'm going to talk a little bit about the human side of Agile. But before I do that, I want to start off with a quick little experience that I've had. So I wanted to have some time ago, I was actually working with one of the diplomatic mission here in Nepal to transition its workforce to a new setting. And as part of the due diligence, I was discussing with some of these folks, and a bunch of guys who had joined the organization relatively new said this to me. So he said, well, you know what? My question was, how was your experience so far in the embassy that you were working for? And they said, you know what? Right now it's okay. But when we started off, it was very difficult for us. We had one person everybody was reporting to. We were invited in all the meetings. That senior person who we were reporting to would call us up directly on our phone and ask us to do something. He would directly walk up to our desk and give us feedback. But in the previous organization, we had a supervisor, and that supervisor had another supervisor on the top, and that supervisor had another supervisor, and it was wonderful. If we had to put some message across, the supervisor would relay the message across to the top, and then if anything was to come from the top, they would relay it back to all of us. Now, these set of people actually liked structure. They liked control. They liked some level of predictability. And now when I talk to some very young people, whether it's a tech or non-tech related organizations, the very first thing is they would say that, you know what, I would love to work in an organization where I can see where my impact is going. I would love to work in an organization where I can directly work with the founders, whether it's a CEO or the senior managers. For them, what they're looking for is autonomy. They're looking for impact, value in what they do. So, as much as you may think that Agile is a bread and butter for you, there are a lot of these organizations for whom it's not only new, but it's probably not the preferred one as well. So I think when we start talking about understanding of the other domain or the understanding of the other department, I think we need to bring that understanding in our core. Now, we may say that, okay, so we practice Agile as a tech company or tech-led companies or development teams, and maybe perhaps the other industries don't as much. But even when you look back at, even when we talk about development teams, right? Even when we talk about tech teams, there again, and I'm sure some of you guys will concur on this, you will see a lot of differences here again. For instance, our finance team is contractually bound with the customer on the basis of the number of teams and the number of resources that are used for a specific set of months. It's very, very linear. When you talk about project management teams, not in all the organizations, but in general, and including the sales team, your idea of how the project should be managed is dependent on time and to a certain extent budget as well. Again, it's very, very linear. And then when you look at the core development team, your focus is more about sprint, making sure you have shippable products, usable products, and it's very, very cyclic. So we have two different languages trying to solve the same problem. Now, if you thought that that was enough, even when you look inside the development team, you will see multiple different layers. You will see a bunch of engineers who will work really hard to resolve problems, but then solving problems do not really provide solution all the time. You can create one of the most sophisticated codes only to realize that code does not work because you understood the requirement. There was there was a mistake in understanding the requirement. And you could also have managers who are very ambitious. They want to ensure that they have the best of agile practices in the organization. So what they would do is they would ensure that you have more retros, you have more stand-ups, you have more sprints, you have more documentation in place. Everything is good on the surface, but when it comes to the really end product, perhaps it doesn't work, right? And then you have these, and this is the most important of the lot. You have this young bunch of crowd who have been taught in a certain way in the colleges, and as they come in, they are quite lost. And the easiest thing for them to do is just to simply follow the crowd. So they just catch with the drift and move ahead with the tide. And if the culture is good, they're going to get sucked in very easily, and that's wonderful. But if the culture is bad, you're going to have a lot of chronic issues. So, as you can see, that as much as it's very, very normal for you to understand Agile, there are industries around where you still have very linear practices of non-Agile practices. And some of these people will join your company, if not straight away in tech, but they will join companies, they will join organizations and departments which stands around your peripheral. HR, procurement, administration, finance, and sometimes project management as well. And even within the organization, within the development team, as I said, you have multiple different layers. Because Agile means different things to different people, right? And so, first of all, I think at a macro level, I think it's very important to understand what is that practice that we would want to adhere to, right? And so the question comes in, how are you going to define Agile? A lot of times, even in very good organizations, the definition of agility is often defined not really by the core uncertainties, but is actually defined by the loudest person in the room, or sometimes the loudest team in the organization. So in your organization, if the sales team happens to be very, very strong, they are going to define Agile for you. Or if your team, if let's say the user interface or user experience team is very, very strong, they are going to define Agile for you. But then it should be defined by the customer. It should be defined by the business environment that you're in, the kind of level of uncertainty that you are in. Because there have been some organizations that I've worked with where you don't really need to have a high level of agility because a big part of what you do is highly predictable and your outcomes are going to be very, very predictable. So if you follow Agile, a very cyclic approach, for something that you know what's the outcome going to be, you're going to miss on efficiencies. And then there are organizations where you have leadership that have come from a strong historical experience of efficiency and effectiveness, and they would advocate on the linear approach. So in practice, it's Agile, but in the mindset, it's very, very linear again. And that's, again, going to lead to very, very chronic approaches. So a big part of what we discussed today is pretty much more on the macro level, in terms of adherence, in terms of establishing coherence across departments within the development team, and perhaps, as we can be ambitious more, we extend Agile Nepal to the other industries and establish coherence there as well. But despite doing all of that, sometimes you will also come across issues. What you come across on a day-to-day basis is not very different from what another organization who does not even practice a bit of Agile has similar problems. And those problems are these symptoms, which you as a team manager, you as a team member, you as a project manager, you as a sales team will come across often, no matter how great Agile practices you may have established, or no matter how coherent are your different departments aligned together, right? Now, if anyone in this audience says, well, none of these in our organization, then you guys are very, very lucky, or you have no clue about it. Because this is a very common thing. Yes, you could have different levels. In some organizations, this could be very, very chronic. And in some organizations, it may just be on the surface. So you could have cases where you have a case of calm. Everything is working wonderful. When the CEO steps in, or when senior manager steps in, everything looks very cool. People are doing their job, they come on time, they do the documentation, they attend retros, they don't miss any stand-ups. But at the end of the day, the product is not turning out in the way that you would have imagined. Your competition is doing a lot more better than what you could have done. Your competition is doing a lot more better than the way it appears to be in the team. And that's calm. The opposite of that is polarization, which means you have a team where it's highly polarized. There is this one guy or one bit of people who just doesn't like you at all. It's not about what you do. It's just about things don't work out. It's very difficult to have a meaningful conversation with that individual or with that team. And then you could have cases about poor ownership, poor accountability, passing the buck. So I'm a mobile developer. This is what I'm going to do. Testing is going to be done by somebody else, so let him do it. But deep down, you know that there is this 2 lines of code which is going to create a problem, but you've not said it so because that's all you have to do. It's working, so you hand it over to the quality guy or tester, right? And the tester realizes it and pushes back to him, and he knows about it. It's coming, right? So it's very predictable in an unpredictable situation, right? So you could have these cases of poor ownership, poor accountability. Poor ownership and accountability is not just a case of where, you're not going to. So obviously, it's also about not taking initiatives, not taking that extra mile. But it's also about just adhering to what you're supposed to do. You can do that. A lot of times when I talk to some of the other industries, it is always nice when people adhere to the job description, which is wonderful. Because you are creating meaningful products which are very, very predictable. But when you're creating products that you are going to understand on the go, a lot of times customers also don't know what they're trying to achieve. In these kind of situations, your job description just becomes some level of structure which has to be very, very flexible tomorrow, which means if you are very good in testing and mobile development, you might as well lend a helping hand, not by doing the person's job, but giving that little bit of twist, tap, saying that, hey, I might just have some issue. And even that gesture is an extension of ownership. Now, the question comes in, why is this happening? And that's the most important, really, the discussion. And I see that the subsequent conversation is about emotional intelligence and a lot of other things, which is going to really be connected. But before we get into deeper understanding of why this happens, let me give you a quick scenario. Okay? Now, it may not completely concur with all the team members here, but for some of you who work in a very outsourced environment, maybe you will agree with me. Imagine a situation where the sales team comes to you and says that here is the customer's requirement. This is what we need to do. The project manager or the project management team or maybe the solution architecting team kind of pulls in all that data and builds some level of solution with a project plan, et cetera, and goes back to the sales team. The sales team looks at it and says, product is quite good, it's quite kick-ass, but you know what? This is not going to fly. It's too expensive. We need to cut down. And the product manager may say, at the expense of cutting down some of the features, the sales guy will definitely say, no, not at all. Keep all the features. Keep all the things that is required. Just do something around where the budget comes down. The customer is not going to buy this solution if you price it accordingly. And this is the point where the product manager looks at it. I think the first thing that he will do is he'll look at the team composition and we'll see in case he can reduce some of the team members. Or if not, he's going to make a rich team composition to a little moderate team composition, which means he might reduce, let's say he takes a good user interface, user experience design guy with about 15 years of experience or 10 years of experience and replaces it with someone with 2 years of experience. The cost comes down, obviously. And then he goes with the product, he goes to the sales team, and the sales team likes it. Now the product team goes back to the product manager, goes back to the development team, the lead looks at it, and then he realizes this is going to be very difficult without a good user experience designer. And eventually, the lead, agrees to what the product development team or the manager says, with the thinking that, well, you know what, eventually I have to listen to him anyways, so I might as well move ahead with it. And when the development actually is happening, you might realize that the user interface guy, the poor chap, is barely a year in the company, and the kind of output that he has is not impressive enough. So what eventually turns out to be is there's a lot of rework which delays your delivery further. So eventually all of you guys come together in a team meeting, and then you realize, oh, you know what, I think what we need to do is we need to put an experienced guy. We made a blunder by doing this. You talk to the product development guy, and the product development guy says, yeah, well, let's do that. But you know what? We'll have to take an approval for this. Oh, let's go to the VP. And the VP looks at it. The delivery is already on. The contract is already signed. He has to sign it because he has to show his face to the customer. So eventually, now we're coming back to the zone again. The customer gets what he wants. The product sales team also gets what he wants. The team also gets what he wants, but eventually the organization there's a little impact on the cost side, which is not a big deal from an agile management perspective. But that's what's happening. So now if you look at it, you know, the way the sales team functions, the way the project team functions, the way the development team functions, everybody has one unified vision, which is basically creating a kick-ass solution. Nobody is saying, you know what, I know the sales team wants this, but I'm a pretty smart chap here. I'm not going to make that. I'm going to make something else. Nobody's going to think likewise. Everybody's going to make a kick-ass. But how are you going to do it? The sales team wants to do it by making sure the budget is low. The product team wants to do it by making sure the timeline is achievable. And the development team wants to do it by making sure that tomorrow nobody puts a finger on him and he has all the things in his bag to respond to if the questions does arise, which means time, budget, people, all that thing. So we have a difference about how we want to achieve the same goal, but not what. Most of the time, the focus or the problems are not about what we want to achieve. I think that amount of sanity pretty much everybody has, right? So what we end up doing is how we want to achieve that, the way we want to solution it, the way we want to address that, how we want to achieve it, we use a concept called cause and effect, which is very scientific. And this comes naturally for all of you, including myself, who comes from engineering backgrounds. Cause and effect. You know, which means if we can't align to the cost of the customer, so let's do one thing. Let's reduce the cost by reducing some number of people or reducing the qualification or the skill set of people. Right? Oh, the UX guy is not able to create the kind of things that we want. Let him step out and let's bring in some more experienced guy. Cause and effect. Which is all wonderful. But if you let cause and effect take a precedence in your solution making all the time, what it is going to do, or what it has been doing, is that it impairs your human interaction, and which is basically the center of your Agile manifesto. So what do I mean by that? The cause and effect has an underlying assumption underneath that, and most of the time, the answers to how, along with the cause and effect, is also based on assumptions. And most of the time, we would like to kind of counter a problem by having a solution in place, but we don't want to address the human side of it. And the human side of it, again, is based on assumptions. These assumptions, which I'm going to talk about in a short while from now, as it gets added in further and further layers, these becomes chronic diseases that are the one that I talked about some time back. And then they become your culture. And then what you do is, rather than solving the problem, what you end up doing is you start romanticizing the problem. And it goes something like this. So the dev team is going to go to the product development team and says, Dai, can we do something about it? Can we reduce it? We can't do it. And then the product development team says, what to do? Sales team, they're always like that, And then the lead goes back to his fellow men, women, of course, miss there. And then you go back, and then the guy says, you know what, I think we're going to burn out with the kind of team composition that we have. And then the guy is going to address back, in a very emotional way a lot of times. And it works because you've been with the herd for a very long time. So he says, you know what can I do? The project management office is like that. Or the product manager is like that. You know how it works with them. They're always after they don't know what's going on with them. So you basically start romanticizing the problem. You don't get into the problem. You let the problem be the way it is. And you love the fact of it. So, roll it up. So, in the previous slide, as I showed, the problem is not with the what. The problem is the whys and hows. Now, we all know about it, the whole whys, why, there are tons of TED talks about why is so important, right? But it is essentially important because it gives you a space to create dialogues in conflict. It creates a space for you to at least understand what are your aspirations, how would you like the work to be done, and vis-a-vis with how it's actually done right now. You may not solve that problem, but just that understanding of it is actually a good start. And this can create a lot of innovations. So, next. So, when we sit back with, so if you essentially were supposed to kind of get back down and then figure out why is it happening? Why is it the product development team always listening to the sales team? I don't know. Maybe it is that the way the organization is structured in such a way the sales team is always the most experienced guy in ranks. He gets paid higher. Maybe he has a very fancy accent. And somehow we've been made to believe that we got to listen to the sales guy. Eventually, that's the one who basically lights up our shop. If not in this organization, maybe you had the same kind of expectation in the previous organization, so you brought that assumption along without even testing it if it's real in this organization. Maybe the product development guy was once a very strong back-end developer, and he moved up his ladders, up to the rank of being a product manager. And the organization that he worked in before perhaps was a software development company where the core was in back-end, where the user experience wasn't that important. And then he took all that assumption to the new organization where UX really matters, but he never bothered. So for him, the easy way to call out of reducing the number of headcount or reducing the skill set, quality of team was to have a little not so nice a version of another UX developer. So it's in these human interactions, if you were to unearth why is it happening the way we do it, why is it that one guy never seems to take ownership of things? Rather than saying, "Uta estai ho, timi गर न," that is a cause and effect. But literally going down and trying to figure out what are these underlying assumptions basis which the person is not able to take ownership. The person is not able to take one step ahead. Why is it that the person is not able to see the larger picture? Who knows, this particular one guy who never takes ownership was once upon a time a very, very enthusiastic guy, just fresh out of college, ready to do anything. If he's been asked to do 10 tasks, he always ends up doing 12 tasks. He also goes back to one of those guys and takes another task out from him and completes that. One day, he has to step out of the city because he's got a very important engagement happening, some work happening at the other end of the town. And at this point, he tells the boss, "You know what, I need to go. And at this point in time, the boss says, "You know what, the deliverable, the release is tomorrow. You've always been great for us." And then the guy is not able to say no. And then when he joins another organization or another team, he realizes that it's so difficult to say no in this organization. So maybe the underlying assumption is his incapability of saying no, or maybe his understanding that no is never accepted here. So rather than that, let's limit our scope of engagement, interaction, and let's me focus on that. Because at the end of the day, if tomorrow something big comes up and that's what's expected out of me, I cannot say no. Or the organization is not ready to take that as a no. So there are a lot of these underlying assumptions which we've not unearthed. And the easy way out is to shift the goalpost. So I'm here, this is my aspiration of how I want to manage my organization, my team, my product, etc., the agile way. But in reality, this is what's happening here. So there's a gap between the two. So what we do is we can't fix it, or we think we fixed it by using a cause and effect. So by reducing the number of headcount, you've reduced the cost, but you've not fixed it. You've just shifted the goalpost. Because you're going to use the same problem again. And then what happens is this becomes a part, this cause and effect starts developing poor human interactions underneath. And over a period of time, if you do not take care of it early on, this becomes chronic. This becomes your part of your culture. And this is very difficult, especially for people who just start off their career in tech and when they come across a very toxic environment where they see that. And this is especially also important for organizations which are scaling up right now. Because at a very entrepreneurial layer, everybody starts off with a high level of human interaction. It's given because everybody is bothered about one another. Everybody is bothered about that one product that they have to release. But as organizations scales up, we build processes, structures, which are good. I'm not saying it's bad at all, but we have to be very, very aware of the fact that a lot of these things might end up deepening human interactions, which are already poor at this moment. And then this develops into chronic diseases. So how do we end up sort of, as individuals, as engineering managers, as developers of all kinds, across all stacks, project managers, and even people who may not be even remotely associated with the tech, how do you end up unearthing these assumptions and improve human interactions so that we can improve human centricity internally, which is employee centricity or team member centricity? We are very, very aware of customer centricity. But you cannot have customer centricity if you don't have employee centricity, because it directs you how to do that. As I spoke earlier today, that a lot of what you do, your agile has to be defined by how your customer or the business market or uncertainties are. And that should cascade all the way down to how you interact within your teams, inter-teams, intra-teams, etc. And a big part of that is on learning, right? You can have all kinds of skills. You can have the best of minds, you can have the best of frameworks, you can have the best of tools. These are really, really good because this accelerates your human interactions. But by using that as a camouflage and remove human interactions, then you'll have a lot of problems. This is an example of the symptoms of calm. Everything is working great. You open up Zeta, everything is good. You know, all the documentations are in place. But then you start digging in, and then you realize that there's a huge noodles in your coding. And the worst is people are not ready to own. Because we don't have human interactions as much as we should have, right? Now, there's a myth that people think that people who come from engineering backgrounds are not people who have good antennas. When I say antennas, I mean ability to kind of take your understanding of human intelligence or emotional intelligence, as the next speaker would talk about. You can. And it's a very purposeful, it's a very, very professional and purposeful way of doing it. I cannot say that, I'm not an empathetic person. I may not be a very empathetic person. I can decide and choose to be one for that period of time. If you are a great footballer, like for example, I play cricket, used to play cricket. Just because one is a very good cricket, he doesn't go out to bat and start hitting six in all the balls. Even if the team requires just one run out of 6 balls, you don't start hitting 6 balls on the very first thing. You force yourself in that zone of professionalism where you know that if you let go of the wicket, you just have 5 balls for 1 run. Although you're still in a good position, that's not a very professional way of doing it. Similarly here, I hear this often, that a lot of engineers, people who come from tech backgrounds, may not be very empathetic. It's just a myth. Perhaps we need to start shifting that, and perhaps we need to kind of put ourselves in that zone. And what requires in that zone? Can we go to the next slide? Is taking down the defense mechanisms. Now, what are the defense mechanisms we have here? I'll give you some very classic examples, okay? I would love to take some questions after this, but for now, let me give you some very classic examples. One of the biggest defense mechanisms for a manager or a person at a very senior level is the assumption that the person has built over the time that I'm a manager now, I should be very confident, meaning not just in my body posture and the way I talk, etc., and I deal with my team members, but also in the way I have answers to all the problems. This is a huge defense mechanism that a lot of people put in, and this I can replace this with an entrepreneur as well. Depending on your capacity and your appetite to become an entrepreneur, after you reach a certain level, you start putting that defense mechanism. Oh, you know what? I've done this for the last 5 years. Who knows better in this city than me about doing this? And when you put that defense, the assumption, then what happens is you start getting insights, and you start not getting energy as well. When I say energy, I mean engagement. You might get customer insight, but you also would like to get customer engagement, isn't it? Like, for example, you may want to know what customer wants, but you also want customers who are enthusiastic, wants to work with you. So that's what I mean by energy here. So this is what, so when the UX guy, let's talk about the user interface guys, right? So when the user interface guy goes to the head of the lead or the product development guy and he says, I've been trying very hard, but I don't have so much of an experience. You know it. Can I take some help? I'm not saying this is what a product manager may do, but for example, the product manager might just say that, oh, you know what? I'll just go and talk to someone else. And then you go and talk to a lead guy, and the lead guy says, the person is not so experienced right now, so it's very difficult to get work out of him. And then you ask, what do you suggest? And he says, I think we should replace. And then you replace. Now you are that particular manager is in a pressure because he has to prove that he knows his stuff. He knows his craft. He's a confident person. He knows what's going on. So he goes to this guy to ask only to kind of get a basic information about it, but he hasn't really gone to the level where he wants to know why is that problem even happening? Why is it that this particular guy is unable to deliver? Is it because poor understanding of the requirement? Is it because he's not getting enough time from his lead? Is it because he has not used those particular tools for example, he may have never used Illustrator. He's been using Figma all the while, as is the case with a lot of young designers now. And that's taking him time. So that defense mechanism doesn't allow you to learn. And whether it's knowing your customers or whether you're knowing your employees or whether even knowing your team members, that defense mechanism adds another layer of assumptions over another assumption. And then that, again, as I said, it doesn't let you give insight. Even in team members, one of the biggest defense mechanisms that you would put in is you think that because you are a team member and the development lead or project manager is directing you something, the assumption here is this guy has spent 5 years more than me, so he must be experienced in his work. So I would rather listen. Maybe my question is going to be very, very stupid. You've been built in the assumptions, and this can come from a social structure where, as a young person, you're not highly entertained in your dining table. And this assumption has built over the period of time, depending on our education system, where we can't question our teachers often. So these layers keeps adding, and this creates another very strong defense mechanism which does not allow you to bring insight. So this can go the other way around as well. As a team member, you also need to have a very deep empathy for the person above you. Just because you have limited things to do, you come with your tight fit jeans and wearing your dangling headphones. That's because that's what some of the people in the Bay Area and Silicon Valley do. That does not make you a person that is completely agile or attuned to your overall culture of tech development. Your level of empathy also has to go the other side. And that can only happen if you let go of the defense mechanism where you genuinely want to question your authority or the boss on the top as to why it's happening. Maybe the UX guy could have asked, Dai, what do you think? I mean, do you think I'm suited for this? Because I understand the kind of guys that I'm working with, the backend guys and the mobile dev guys are way experienced than me, and I'm here just for 3 months. So if you think I'm okay, I'll do it. And then when you start this discussion and dialogue, if you have a supervisor who is really responsible, he might either say, yeah, you know what, you're right, I need to do something about it. Or the supervisor may say, you know what, I know what you're thinking, but I have full confidence on you, and we'll work it out together. The moment you say that, you're building that discussion and dialogue. The other guy is going to let the defense go down as well, and then you're going to have further better interactions. So these are very lofty words, empathy, inquiry, reflection, change, etc., etc. You can create amazing processes. You can create amazing customer journey, amazing personas. You can go through some amazing training on emotional intelligence build-up. But if you do not take time to kind of look at why are we doing the way we are doing things, or why is there a difference the way I'm managing and the way he is managing, if you do not look into our own assumptions as to why do I always, let me just say it, okay? There are few organizations that I've worked with, and I have got a sense that there is this bunch of guys who think highly superior of being a back-end developer as compared to somebody who is doing a quality audit or quality tester. Why is that so? Perhaps the underlying assumption here is that coding is meant for some really intelligent, smart people. We come up with that assumption. We build, I grew up with that assumption. Coding is meant for these really guys, who are good in studies and who are, fundamentally what I think is coding is for those guys who's got a very high sense of patience, long stamina, sit in front of in the chair and kind of figure out where you've gone wrong because you have to fix the boxes and that's what you learn. And the rest is basically learning coding is easier because you have a feedback mechanism, which means you do something, you shows on your browser, especially in web development cases. You don't have to punch one button and wait for it for like 1 day whether it goes right or wrong. It's like doing a math, When you have math, it's like playing video games. Video games are fun because you kill one person, it shows you right on the screen that you've killed one person. Your feedback is very, very right away. So learning that way is very easy, but it's more about the patience and the stamina that you have and sit in the front of the computer. And of course, you have a passion for that. And if you are also intelligent, that's really, really good. So what happens is we build with that assumption, and then when we see a bunch of quality guys who's got some very process-oriented way of doing things, we kind of put that person on the side because, you can always do that. It doesn't really add a lot of impact. And by doing that, what we're trying to do is we're trying to build gaps in the way we understand agile management. So you can do whatever you can with the empathy, change, communication, and inquiry, and reflection, and so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, if you choose not to question the way your aspiration of how things should be and how it is, and you're not ready to build that discussion and dialogue within the organization, you will never get that energy and insight. These things about empathy and inquiry and reflection will just be a skill set in a corner, will just be a process in the corner, will just be some level of framework like customer journey creation and persona creation, will be on the side. But it's the human interaction which is going to bring it together. And more so now with the amazing generative AIs coming in the picture, that we have to focus on what we can give back to the society, which is not just the codes, but our ability to kind of connect and build on that connection, right? So with that in mind, I think I'm nearing to my conversation here, but I'm more interested in taking up questions, because that probably would add a lot of more value in, I think, how much time do we have really? It's already up. So, thank you so much for your time, and thanks so much for Agile Nepal for bringing me up here, and hope to see you soon. Bye. Take care. Bye.